Does 22 years in power change a man? Or was this Vladimir Putin's grand design all along? In justifying his invasion of Ukraine, the master of the Kremlin talked of denazification and how Russians and Ukrainians are the same people. Now, with the ground offensive failing to net a quick win, Moscow's reportedly dialing back the denazification part. We'll ask if that's true. But more broadly, the war didn't happen in a vacuum. Of all the former Soviet states, Ukraine's the one with the largest Russian population. The breakup of the USSR, described by Putin way back in 2005 as the last century's greatest geopolitical catastrophe. And just as the Russian president's had 22 years to consolidate his grip on the oligarchs, the media, and the security apparatus, he's also moved methodically to restore and grow the grandeur of Russkaya Mir, the Russian world. He's even got the blessing and backing of the Russian Orthodox Church, which looked reluctantly on his 2004 annexation of Crimea. That was before the Ukrainian church split with Moscow. We'll ask about a mindset that, well, cannot be reduced to one man in one moment. How does that mindset evolve now in a nation that's surprised to find itself at war with its neighbor? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Putin's greater Russia. Joining us, France 24 Moscow correspondent Nick Holdsworth is here in Paris. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Want to welcome back as well Craig Capidis, contributing editor at Quartz and the Daily Beast, author of Bear Hunting with the Politburo. How are you?
Okay.
We're also in the company of historian Antoine Arjakovsky, director of research at the Collège des Bernardins. Theological school, is that how you describe it?
Well, it's a cultural center. It's also a theological faculty. It's a, research center also.
You are also the author of What is Orthodoxy? A Genealogy of Christian Understanding. And we want to welcome as well from Innsbruck, Austria, Christina Stokel, professor of sociology at the University of Innsbruck. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation, and you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, the guns have yet to go silent. Our correspondent in Kharkiv telling us as much just a short while ago. Nonetheless, Moscow promising to scale back operations around the capital, Kyiv and Chernihiv. This as peace talks in Turkey this Tuesday showed positive signs. Those are the words of the Ukrainian delegation. The Financial Times reporting earlier that the Russian delegation had even dropped demands of, quote, denazification. That would be a marked change from what Vladimir Putin's foreign minister said on the eve of the discussions.
We have to make sure that Ukraine stops assimilating itself with the West, with NATO, in the military sense. Both the demilitarization and the denazification of Ukraine are an essential component of the agreements that we are trying to achieve.
Those don't sound like the words of someone who's about to bargain in good faith with an adversary, but yet both sides coming out of the meeting on Tuesday saying it. These were the most substantial talks they've had since the start of the war.
Sounds very much like Sergei Lavrov is spouting the party line. That has been the line all along, that the Kremlin wants to denazify and demilitarize.
In other words, oust Volodymyr Zelensky.
Well, absolutely. I mean, they're all about regime change. They're about taking over the entire country. And I dare say they wouldn't actually stop there, although that's not obviously been announced by the Kremlin, because they wouldn't do that, would they? However, I think what we're seeing here is we're seeing the Ukrainian side playing softly, and the Russian side backpedaling a bit, I suspect, because they want to pull off some kind of a feint. The Russians have form on promising a lot and then breaking their promises, particularly in talks of this kind, where they're talking about having a ceasefire. They're going to use this period. They've said they're not going to be attacking around Kiev and Chernihiv at the moment. They're going to use this period to regroup. I don't think that the Ukrainians trust the Russian negotiators. In fact, I'm pretty sure they don't. And they're probably right not to. There's a lot of politics and tactics going on, but it's quite clear that the Russians have been forced into a certain position because their army has been mauled in the field by the Ukrainian fighters.
The French president, who's been speaking once again, it's the 9th time with his Russian counterpart, unable, says the French presidential palace, to secure a humanitarian corridor out of the besieged port city of Mariupol. Do you agree with Nick Holdsworth that right now, this is too early to say that there's any kind of progress.
I agree with Nick's assessment, and I'll be very Russian about it. At the same time, I completely disagree with it, because Putin is in Ukraine to make an example. He's there to terrify, to force submission, and he's in power till 2036. Let me tell you something. He's incorrigibly barbarous. He can drag this thing out for as long as he wants. And
Despite sanctions?
He doesn't care about the sanctions. Why is everyone obsessed with the sanctions? Putin has never cared about the people he ruled. Just doesn't. I mean...
Not quite correct.
Look, I always have to say this. The biggest mistake you can make when looking at anything Russian is to analyze it through a Western prism.
Absolutely.
The moment you do that, Putin's got you by the you-know-what.
Antoine Ajarkovsky, the Ukrainians saying, well, we're scoring wins on the battlefield. They're starting to take us seriously. That's what they're saying.
Yes, and the Ukrainians, they say also that they just don't want to speak about demilitarization or denazification. This is what Zelensky said 2 days ago in Russian. He said, the only thing I am ready to speak is the guarantees for our security. We are ready not to be part of NATO, but we need to have guarantors that would give us a paper, not like in 1994 with the Memorandum of Budapest, but a paper that would be ratified by the countries like France, like Turkey, like Great Britain, and so on. So this is the most important subject of discussion today in Istanbul, is who will be the guarantors, how it will happen, through a referendum or through the Rada, the parliament in Ukraine, and when it will be done. It will be done only when the Russian army will leave the Ukrainian territory, the Ukrainian territory before the February 24th.
Yeah, go back to the February 24th borders, or who controlled what. And Craig Capita saying that that the Russian president doesn't care about sanctions. They are in Moscow starting to feel the pinch. Still, though, steadfastly standing by their leader. It's a report read by Gulliver Cragg.
Alexander, a Muscovite pensioner, gets his groceries at ever higher prices.
What really astonished me was the price of these peppers, 277 rubles a kilo, for vegetables.
Since the invasion of Ukraine, Russia's currency has collapsed and inflation is rising. Like all Russians, Alexander is having to adapt.
Fruit juice, for example. I can't buy the one I want. I have to buy things that are on special.
To help him relativize these problems, Alexander can count on Russian TV.
You see, there are shortages all over the world. It's not just here that prices are rising.
Sometimes he has the feeling the TV doesn't say the whole truth.
I suppose that it's probably true, because it seems plausible, highly plausible, but at the same time, not at all. Really not at all. But we can't rule it out either. So even if you think maybe it's not, it's probably true.
Some propaganda messages leave Alexander with serious doubts, though.
В руки наших военных попали документы, которые подтверждают, Киев готовился к агрессии против России.
An attack from Ukraine against Crimea? I doubt it. They know that would have meant open war with Russia.
Nevertheless, Alexander supports his country and his president.
Blaming Putin for all ills is like blaming Stalin. It's the course of politics and history that forced them to take certain decisions. They had no choice. You have to understand me. I'm Russian, and I can't very well see how I could not support my country. I can criticize it or not like it. But in a situation like this, I must support it. It's like a wife. A good wife may think her husband is right or not, but in any case, she has to stand by him and reload his ammunition.
Но в любом случае я буду стоять рядом и подавать патроны.
Alexander has a character trait that's vital for Russians today more than ever: resignation.
Well, let's turn to the sociologist in the room, Christina Stöckel. You heard that pensioner say Putin, like Stalin before him, had no choice. What's your reaction when you hear that?
Well, this is the result of a very successful propaganda that has been going on not only since the war started, but already for the last years. And I would say definitely starting in 2014, namely that Ukraine is being influenced by Western powers. It's being almost seduced by the West to turn against Russia, which is really its historical brother. And so Russia now is forced to intervene and to sort of bring these areas and these people back to its destiny and destination. And I said that this started in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea and with a battle that Russia, with the Maidan, had lost of turning the Ukrainian government to a Russia-wards and eastward direction. And from that moment onwards, there has been a certain demonization going on of Ukrainians. And that was in simple gestures. It was even in films, in patriotic films, where, Ukrainians would be depicted as Nazi collaborators. And you also have to see that since 2014, the connections between the countries have been relatively disrupted. I mean, now everybody says, well, the families are well connected and everyone is family in Russia and in Ukraine, and that's true. But in 2014, for a short period, when the war started, Ukraine required visas of Russians to enter and banned men in the military age to enter the country. And that was a great offense for many Russians. They'd say, well, if I'm now no longer allowed to go to Ukraine, I will no longer go to Ukraine. And really, I think the knowledge and the understanding of what was happening in Ukraine, in Russia, but also among, Russian people, very normal people, has sort of diverged. They no longer understand each other. They don't understand the experience that Ukraine has gone through since 2014.
Pushing it back to 2014, Nick Holsworth, I mentioned at the outset that 2005 State of the Nation speech where Vladimir Putin called the breakup of the Soviet Union a catastrophe. In that same speech, he said, this is 2005, not 2014. He said, tens of millions of our fellow citizens and countrymen found themselves beyond the fringes of the Russian territory. Do you think that back then he was thinking about something like what we're witnessing unfolding now?
I'm not sure there was any specific plan of the kind of the concrete actions we've seen since 2014 up until now. But certainly for a long time, there's been this Russian idea that Russia lost out after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It lost a lot of territory, which it regarded as its own in Eastern Europe. Countries that would say they had been occupied, the Kremlin regarded as part of Russia. And there is this idea of a greater Russia. There was a book written around that time, around 2005, maybe 2007. I remember interviewing the author, and I think it was called something like The Fifth Empire. And it was the idea that you have that the Russian Empire is reasserted from Vladivostok in the east to Dublin in the west, to take the entire European continent. And this is an old idea in Russia. If you remember, here in Paris in 1814, the Tsar's army, the Russian Hussars, chased Napoleon's army all the way to Paris and occupied Paris for a while. Now, those sort of ideas haven't gone away, and there is this idea that Russian security
But for most of the time, those were fringe ideas. Do you agree with Christina that 2014 was the turning point?
I think so, because you're right, these were fringe ideas. So what we hear uttered by the patriarch today, or also by Vladimir Putin, that's not new arguments.
Let me bring in Nick Holdsworth on this. Do you agree with that?
Those were fringe ideas, and they've become increasingly mainstream. And the idea that the Ukrainians are just little brothers to the Russians is an insulting idea to the Ukrainian people and to a sovereign European state.
When he launched that war in Ukraine, it was said that Vladimir Putin was going in to protect the Russians on the other side of the border in the Donbass region. Russia, which, by the way, the country itself has a population of 140 million, but there's 20 to 30 million ethnic Russians abroad. Here we can show you a chart. Ukraine is the biggest population of ethnic Russians in the world. It's something like 17% of its population. Then you have Kazakhstan and the United States. There's a lot of Russians who've moved there in various waves. And then Germany. The Russians, according to Putin, under threat. So are Russian values. Last week, the Russian president blasting Western cancel culture.
Today they are trying to cancel a 1,000-year-old country, our people. I'm talking about the continuing discrimination of everything connected with Russia, a trend that is unfolding in a number of Western states with the complicity and sometimes the encouragement of the ruling elite. The notorious cancel culture has become a cancellation of culture. Tchaikovsky, Shostakovich, Rachmaninoff are excluded from concert posters. Russian writers and their books are also banned. The last time such a mass campaign to destroy literature was carried out was by the Nazis in Germany 90 years ago.
So, Antoine Arjovsky, I'm learning about the ban on Rachmaninoff and Shostakovich and Tchaikovsky, but your thoughts when you listen to what Vladimir Putin is saying. Again, is this suddenly fringe ideas that are coming up, or is this the same Vladimir Putin that we've known for 22 years?
For me, it's the same Vladimir Putin. He's a KGB officer. He's not a historian, but he wants to protect his own power with some theories. And there is a theory before him that is the theory of the Great Russia. And it's this theory of Great Russia comes from the 19th century with Karamzin, who was a historian of the Tsars. And he took this idea, which is very popular in Russia, including in the Russian immigration, and he used this theory in order to develop his idea of the Russian Empire. He criticized the Soviet Union, and this is what he said on February 24 when he attacked Ukraine. He said, "You want to put off the statues of Lenin, so come back to the empire. I am the representative of the empire." So this is his main view. He wants to use this theory of the Russian Empire, which is a false theory, but he's not a historian. He's a political leader. He wants to keep the power, and this is why he instrumentalized the history teachings.
Does it work?
It certainly works with the Russian people. Most Russians get their news from the Russian state media, from television, as we saw earlier in Gulliver Craig's report there. And they believe most of it, maybe not all of it. I remember a month ago when I was sitting in Moscow, I think I mentioned it on the last time I was on the debate, that I showed the front page of the Rossiyskaya Gazeta, the Russian state newspaper, to a news vendor, and it had the full copy of Vladimir's war speech. It was the Friday, the 25th, I guess, of February. And I said, "Do you believe this man? Do you believe what he's saying? Has he got a heart?" And I said, "Has he got a soul?" She said, "Oh, no." I said, "Has he got a heart?" She said, "Maybe." Yeah. So they do filter it, but at the moment they can't get any independent news because independent journalism has been entirely shut down. And that's been Putin's project all along. As our fellow guest just said, he's a KGB officer, and one of the first things he did within a couple of years of coming to power 22 years ago was he shut down independent media. And he started with TV because that's where most Russians get their news. He eventually went on to newspapers, and we saw yesterday Novaya Gazeta shutting down its operation, the last independent newspaper in Russia.
Right.
No, there's absolutely nothing new about this. It came out of Putin's mouth. The first thing he said, our 1,000-year-old country. This goes beyond Peter the Great when a lot of this nonsense started. Peter was always fighting with Sweden and someone else, and they want to continue this. And the Russians have always been behind their czar, whether you want to like it or not, according to all the polls I've read coming out of Russia and people I've talked to. The majority of Russians, in my opinion, are continuing to be in willful denial. And the reason is they, according to what I've read, they don't care if Putin is lying. Hard to believe in the Western mind, forget the Western prism, because it's okay to lie. It's okay to lie if it's in Russia's interest. And that is what Putin has sold him. That's what every Russian leader has sold them going back to Ivan the Terrible. And to move it forward, the guy who really got this was Peter the Great, who grabbed hold of the church and put it behind the state.
All right, well, let's talk about the church. June of 2020, Dateline Patriot Park, that's in the Oblast neighborhood of Moscow. The Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church consecrates the main cathedral of the Russian Armed Forces. On hand is the Defense Minister, Sergei Shoigu. He's in the front row in attendance.
Today we are celebrating a special day. And of course, I thank the Supreme Commander of the Russian Armed Forces, President of Russian Federation Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Without him, this cathedral would not have been built.
Christina Stokal, how do you characterize that relationship between Vladimir Putin and the Russian Orthodox Church?
Look, I want to say one thing. Putin is not only trying to convince Russians when he speaks about cancel culture, he's also trying to convince Christian conservatives in the West who may agree on the cancel culture question. He did not only speak about canceling Rachmaninoff, he spoke about gender roles, and he gave the example of an outcry that happened against J.K. Rowling when she sort of questioned transgender rights. So what I think is really striking here is that both Putin and the Patriarch are using a playbook that is straight out of the global culture wars between a progressive liberalism and a Christian right. And that playbook owes a lot to Christian debates in the West, to American evangelicalism, to inner Catholic debates. And it owes also something to this idea of Greater Russia and Orthodox traditionalism. So I would say that what characterizes the relationship between the Patriarch and Putin in the last years, and here I would say starting in 2009, when the current Patriarch comes to the office of the Patriarchate, is in a way an ideological service that the Church is doing to the Kremlin by translating sort of cutting-edge issues for a Russian use, both a domestic use. Just remember the anti-gay propaganda law that was published in 2012, or the law against hurting religious feelings. So Christian conservative ideas that we have in the similar debates in the West are translated to Russian for domestic use, but they're also translated for an international use. Russia has successfully presented itself as a vanguard, as a defender of Christianity in the world. Now, you know, we must be careful not to take that serious, but they have been taken serious, saying that they intervened in Syria in defense of Christians in the Middle East, or saying that, you know, they will not go along with supporting gender rights, making initiatives for family values at the UN, and so on. So I think what's really important to see is that this is not only out of a historical idea of Greater Russia. This is also about a global ideological struggle that has been defined in terms of liberal progressive values and a Christian conservatism or religious conservatism.
Let me bring in Antoine Aljagovsky on this. Do you agree that there's sort of an, pardon the pun, an unholy alliance between Putin's brand of Russian Orthodoxy and Christian conservatives in the West?
Well, for me, it's two different things. Maybe before the invasion, some people could have the illusion that there is a connection between Christian conservative values and what Patriarch Kirill is doing. But now, after the invasion of Ukraine, which is for the first time in the history of the Russian Orthodox Church that there is a blessing of an invasion, Patriarch Kirill has lost his reputation all over the Orthodox world. There was a petition that was signed by hundreds of theologians, Orthodox theologians, that said that it's just a heresy from an Orthodox viewpoint, this idea of ethnophilitism, which means that the Russian Orthodoxy is everywhere where there are Russians. If you are Russian, you are Orthodox. If you are Orthodox, you are a member of the Moscow Patriarchate. You see, this is an ethnophilitism. It's a heresy, and Patriarch Kirill is no longer a kind of leader which is respected in the Orthodox world. And this is why there is a schism with the ecumenical patriarchate of Constantinople. You know, the Orthodox world is 200 million people, but now there is this division.
The division, all right, we talked about it at the outset, born in 2014 after the annexation of Crimea. But here in Paris, there are two Russian Orthodox churches, right? There's one that's more closer to the emigre community that's been here a long time, and the other that was prime real estate that was given right near the Eiffel Tower to the Russian state back in 2012.
Well, there are even more Orthodox churches in Paris because there are also Romanians, Bulgarians, and so on.
But two Russians.
But among the Russians, there are those who accept the jurisdiction of the Moscow Patriarchate, those who come from the Constantinople Patriarchate and who accepted the Moscow jurisdictions, and those, finally, who are under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And today, these Christian Orthodox, except the ones who are under the Moscow Patriarchate, are criticizing very strongly the position of the Moscow Patriarchate. In Amsterdam, for instance, there was a parish, the cathedral, under the Moscow Patriarchate. They decided last Sunday...
The Church of St. Nicholas.
Yes, to go out from this jurisdiction of the Moscow Patriarchate and to go to the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which means that really now things are changing. And recently, Jean-François Colosimo, who is a very famous Orthodox thinker in Paris, he said that the next step for the Patriarch Kirill is the International Tribunal in La Haye, because he is a complice of Putin in his attack on Ukraine. So this is why it's really a strong reaction against Kirill today.
This is an argument.
You don't think it's an own goal, Craig Capitas?
It's nonsensical. This is an argument over how many angels dance on the head of a pin, whether you make the sign of the cross with 3 fingers or 2 fingers. This is nonsense for this year.
But it's real. The church in Amsterdam leaving
That's not that big deal. Put it in a religious publication. Vladimir Putin, since he became president of Russia, has built over 60 of these spy churches around the world.
Spy churches?
Yes, they are.
How so?
How so? Ask French intelligence how many listening posts they have around the Holy Trinity Cathedral. Ask the CIA or French intelligence why Pyongyang allowed one of these churches to be built there, one in Myanmar. And ask former President Sarkozy, presidential candidate Valérie Pécresse, and François Fillon, the prime minister, why the French government gave the St. Nicholas Cathedral, the Holy Trinity Cathedral, diplomatic status, diplomatic immunity. That is an outpost of the Russian embassy. It is not just a church.
The whole problem is that there is no separation between church and state in Russia. And this is why we can speak about spy churches, because really it's like a same body.
But do you agree with what Craig said, that it's fishy, the fact that they've got diplomatic immunity?
It's the reputation of these churches of the Moscow Patriarchate that they are not separated from the state. That's a reality. And this is why it makes a problem. If tomorrow there will be a change in Russia, there will be a need for a real secularization, a laicity in the French model of separation between state and church. This is urgent for the Russians, because the Russian church is losing its reputation among intellectuals, artists. They are all leaving the Moscow Patriarchate. So there will be a need of de-radicalization also of the Moscow Patriarchate, because the whole idea of Dugin, who is now the head of the first channel in Russia, and which means the head of propaganda, is the idea of Russia as the third Rome. You know,
Right.
the second Rome, the first Rome, it's the 5th century, died. The second Rome, Istanbul, Constantinople, in the 15th century, died. And we are the third Rome. We need, and there will be no fourth. We can give we can save the world, you see? And that's the whole idea of Dugin, this idea of the mission of evangelization, but through the state, through the empire of the Russian Church, which is a real danger for many Christians and many countries everywhere in the world.
And I think I think it really has to be re-emphasized, Francois. It's a question that has not been asked in this country, and that is, why did the French government give this church diplomatic immunity status, officially making it the chapel of the Russian embassy? Who was in on that decision?
It was a decision made under President Sarkozy.
Exactly.
And what was your thought at the time, Antoine?
I criticized very strongly when I was against this, what happened. And lots of my friends also were against.
Why did they do it?
Well, because at that time there was the idea to have also military contracts with Russia. You remember, this is the time of the Mistral that Sarkozy also signed with Putin.
Those French naval vessels that that François Hollande, then the next president, did not deliver because of the annexation of Crimea.
Exactly. But there was a deal between Sarkozy and Putin. On one side, you give me this church. On the other side, there will be the contract
And
with
there's
the
no
Mistral.
reciprocity. In 1790, right in the Lubyanka, across from where the KGB former KGB headquarters is, there's a church called the Church of St. Louis of France. It's been there since 1790. You know what, Francois? That church doesn't have diplomatic immunity, that French church. Where's the reciprocity?
Christina Stokel, your thoughts on this?
So the Russian Orthodox Church has tried to develop its own and independent external relations profile. There's not only that church in Paris, there's also a church in Strasbourg, which is the representation of the Moscow Patriarchate to the to the Council of Europe and the international institutions. It's a church that runs a website that reports on what's happening at the Council of Europe. Now, Russia just left, so probably that will end. There's a representation to Brussels of the Moscow Patriarchate. So the Russian Orthodox Church, since the 2000s, has started to become sort of a diplomatic player on its own.
So sort
Today,
of the same status as
completely together.
status as the Vatican, in other words.
Yes. They try to acquire that strong status, their Orthodox voice next to the Vatican in global affairs. And in a way, they were on a good track. So what has happened now with this invasion I completely agree with what the other speaker said. That's the end of the moral authority, or of any authority of the Moscow Patriarchate in this global debate over values. But that's what they were doing. And that's what they were doing it also successfully.
So Nick Holdsworth, if we listen to the rest of the panel here, they've won over the Russian population, but lost all their potential allies elsewhere. Is that how
we should recall that the Russian Orthodox Church has basically been an arm and a tool of Kremlin policy since as far back as the 1930s. The Russian Orthodox priesthood was compromised by the NKVD, as it was then, a forerunner of the KGB and the FSB. During the war, there was the infamous order by Stalin to allow religious worship by men at the front again. It's the same time when he allowed officers to have their epaulets back. Men were allowed to have icons on the front because it made them fight harder. And after the war, the KGB infiltrated and compromised the Orthodox Church even more. And the Orthodox Church in Russia and throughout the world, the Moscow Orthodoxy, is very much a tool of Vladimir Putin's Russia. Now, I know for a fact that in the UK, for example, in Bristol, I heard recently that the Russian Orthodox Church there, an awful lot of the Russian worshippers there, Bristol has quite a large Russian diaspora too, had moved over to an ecumenical branch of the Orthodox Church.
And we should say that our invitation to the Russian Orthodox Cathedral in the 7th arrondissement went unanswered. I should point that out in this discussion. Antoine Arjavovsky, I was speaking with someone who's Russian Orthodox, or who's Greek Orthodox, excuse me, and who was saying to me how they fear a little bit being the collateral damage of this, because there's been graffiti spray painted on Orthodox churches, and the wider public doesn't make the difference between which one is affiliated with the Kremlin and which ones have nothing to do with it whatsoever. Have you witnessed this as well?
Yes, but I should say that the whole Orthodox Church is in bad shape today. It's not only the Russian Orthodox Church, it's the whole Orthodox world, which is 200 million people. They tried to have a pan-Orthodox council in 2016, and it failed because the Moscow Patriarchate didn't come, together with the Bulgarian Church, the Georgian Church, the Antiochian Church, and finally there were many questions to be solved. And the first one was how you give autocephaly, how you give independence to one church, let's say Ukraine. And this is why the Russian Patriarch Kirill didn't come to Crete, to this pan-Orthodox council. And so many problems were not solved. And today, this Orthodox Church has to solve problems that come from the Middle Ages. You see, how to celebrate together the Easter. They don't celebrate Easter together. Basic problems, and of course the relationship between the power, political power, and the churches. It's not solved. The ecumenical question is not solved. The Serbian church, or worse, the Bulgarian church, is against the ecumenical movement, whereas the ecumenical patriarchate is in favor of the ecumenical movement. So there is a need to heal the wounds of the past. And it is not done because of this conflict between Moscow Patriarchate and the ecumenical patriarchate for the leadership.
And just as we've been talking about the French president's efforts to keep the lines of communication open with Moscow, I know that the Pope has kept the lines of communications open with the Russian Patriarch. Does that matter? Is that important or not?
It's very important, and it's a problem that the Pope speaks only to the Patriarch Kirill. He doesn't see Ukraine. And I wrote many papers to say, look, there is a new Orthodox Church in Ukraine, which is the second Orthodox Church in the world, the Ukrainian Autocephalist Church. And the head of this Orthodox Church of Ukraine is Epiphany, Metropolite Epiphany. He never met the Pope. So the Pope is speaking only to the Russians. He is meeting always, the Cardinal Koch is meeting always Metropolite Ilarion Alfeyev, which is the right hand of the Patriarch Kirill, and they never meet the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. For the Ukrainians, this is like treason. Treason, you see. It's more than 40 million people that has no recognition from the Pope. Of course, there is the Greek Catholic Church. It's 5 million people in Ukraine. But even the Greek Catholic Church, they say to the Pope, look at us, look at the Orthodox Church. So in the future, I think now the Vatican needs to change its policy, its Ostpolitik towards Moscow.
The big problem we have here really is that organized religion, not only Orthodox, but organized religion, getting involved in arguments that date back, as Craig said, or you both said, to the Middle Ages is kind of ridiculous, because you've got people who, if they actually looked at the word of Christ, wouldn't recognize it, because you've got people actually actively working for forces of darkness, and that's what the Moscow Orthodoxy is doing, in league with Putin and blessing a war. How Christian is that?
It's not possible, and the worst is that now Putin is quoting the gospel in order to fight in Ukraine.
Misquoting the gospel in the Luzhniki Stadium.
In Luzhniki,
yes.
Yeah.
Misquoting.
If you give your life for your friends, then you are Christian. It means you need to fight in Ukraine, which means, it's against Christianity.
Yeah.
All right. Before we go, we're talking about the battle of ideas here, and you heard Craig Kapitas earlier talking about how Putin's got time on his side. The sanctions don't matter in the long run. Nick Holdsworth, when you think about, again, this battle of ideas that's playing out,
I'm not
the
sure
world
Putin's
stage.
got time on his side.
You don't think he's got how many
I
years?
think he's
do you
very
he has?
sick. I think he's a very ill man. I don't think he's got long to live.
He's got at least 5.
From the
You wouldn't
sources,
even go that
from the
far?
sources that I'm.
This is speculation. though.
It's
This is-
speculation, but
this
I
is
think he's a very sick man, and I think he's lost the war. As soon as he started the war in Ukraine, he's lost, and Russia has lost, and unfortunately, sadly, the Russian people have lost.
Yeah.
You know, when your only friends are North Korea and a few other dictatorships, well, who needs enemies? And
Well,
the
they
big
say you
winners,
still got India, and that's
Well, the big winners are
staying
gonna be-
out of it. That China's staying out of it.
big
for now.
winners are going to be China. They're already starting to log vast areas of Siberia and Yakutia, which they were given logging rights by Putin before
Right.
the Olympic Games. There was a deal struck with Xi Jinping
That's right.
and Putin. The Chinese are watching very carefully. The Chinese only care about commercial success, and they're going to be the big winners. They'll probably end up taking.
I hope
most of
you're right
Siberia.
about him coming down soon. I hope I'm dead wrong. But when you look that he could, if he stays healthy and no one takes him out, he could be there to 2036. You know as well as I do, if he's still there, he's going to drag this thing out. He's going to wait to see who
He's
the next
visibly
president
aged
is.
in the last
We're
year.
very short on time. Christina Stokel, does Vladimir Putin have time on his side or not?
I think it doesn't depend all on him, and we don't know what will come afterwards. And I'm not optimistic for Russia's future, and also not for the political leadership that will come after Putin, that it will really make a difference.
Antoine Arjakovsky, we're paying too much attention to the man at the top.
No, it's important to know who is Putin, and I agree that I don't see him in the power in the next year. He has lost his war, and which was the most important project of his presidency. Yeah. So the problem is that the Russians, they have lost their future, they have lost their reputation, and Zelensky said 2 days ago, for our generation, the reconciliation is not possible anymore between Ukrainians and Russians. Now we need to think only to our children and grandchildren. So this is the situation today.
We'll have people who cared in Russia, according to all reports, have already fled the country. So Putin's going to have a real tame population to deal with if we're to believe the exodus figures.
All right, two different points of view on what happens next. Of course, the future is unwritten. I want to thank you, Craig Kapidis. I want to thank Antoine Arjakovsky, as well, Nick Holdsworth, Christina Stokel for being with us from Innsbruck. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.